Good morning, everyone. This is your mini lecture for the essay on idealism written by George Berkeley. Yes, the city in California is named after him. No, I don't know why they mispronounce his name. Before we begin an in-depth look at the essay, I'd like to make a few comments to frame the discussion. First, while Berkeley doesn't explicitly say so, he is arguing for the belief that there are no material things in the world. So idealism is the theory that everything that exists is either a mind or an idea. You should also be aware that Philonous is Berkeley's stand-in in the essay. Philonous is the idealist. Hylas doesn't represent any particular philosopher. He merely plays a role of the antagonist to Philonous. On to the essay. The first thing that Philonous wants to consider is whether he, an idealist, is a skeptic. Hylas and Philonous consider two versions of skepticism. Version 1, a skeptic is a doubter. Philonous' answer is that he is no doubter, he has a firm belief that everything is ideal. Version 2, a skeptic denies the existence of sensible things. Philonous' short answer is no, an idealist does not deny the existence of things. He denies that they are material, but he accepts that there are experiences that we have of the world. The longer answer is really what this dialogue is all about. Hylas and Philonous agree that the real question isn't about skepticism, but it is about what we should think about the nature of sensible things. So, Philonous asks Hylas a series of questions about the nature of sensible things. Ultimately, they agree that there is a difference between things that are immediately sensible and things that are mediately sensible. And Philonous argues that we really perceive nothing but immediately sensible things. So, when we see a table, what we see is really just a combination of shapes and colors. From that, we usually infer, but do not directly perceive, that a table exists in the external world. Hylas concedes that we perceive nothing but our own sensations, but he argues that it is reasonable to assume that our sensations are caused by things in the world. Philonous then asks Hylas to consider the question of heat. Philonous asks, is heat real or merely an idea? Hylas answers, it is real. There is a cause of heat in the world. Philonous then asks, but then is heat different from pain? And Hylas responds, no. So Philonous asks, if it is the same as pain, is pain independent or merely perceived? Hylas responds, pain is merely perceived. Philonous concludes, so heat is also merely perceived. In other words, when a pin pricks your skin, is the pain in a pin or in your mind? The answer seems to be that of course the pain is in your mind and not in the pin. And since heat and pain are similar, why should heat be in fire instead of your mind? Don't miss the famous and interesting thought experiment about uh, hands and water buckets. Imagine that one of your hands is cold and the other hot. If you placed your hands in a bucket of warm water, wouldn't the water seem to be both cold and hot? The hot hand would feel cold water, and the cold hand would feel hot water. But of course, the water can't be both cold and hot. So being hot or cold must not be a property of the water, it must be all in your head. We then see a series of thought experiments designed to show that many sensible things are not really in anything besides our minds. These occur on pages 366 and 367. The thoughts about colors is probably the most interesting of these various thought experiments. Colors differ according to different conditions. The presence of colored lights, candles, etc. can alter the way that we see the color of a wall, for example. But since a change in conditions cannot result in a change in the thing itself, we should conclude that colors are not in things. Since the change of the colored lights can affect how I see the color of a wall, we should conclude that the color of the wall is not a property of the wall, but something that happens in my mind. Even properties that seem to be obviously independent from our minds, like motion, size, and shape, are shown to actually be nothing more than perceptions. But rather than walk you through each thought experiment, let's look at Berkeley's master argument. In other words, the argument that is in the background of all of these various examples of different properties. Think of anything whatsoever and think of all of that thing's properties. Can any aspect of that thing be considered in isolation from the ideas? Is there a property that you can think of that isn't in your mind as an idea? If not, then you have to admit that all of the properties that we are aware of exist in our mind. So we have no real evidence for, or no immediate perception of, anything besides mental properties or mental perceptions. So why shouldn't we conclude that all aspects of things in the world are merely ideal and nothing else? In other words, since the only thing we have actual experience of, and therefore actual evidence for, is our own perceptions, it is irresponsible to conclude that there is anything in the world except our own perceptions. If this argument makes sense, then Berkeley has indeed proven idealism to be right, or at least more responsible than materialism, like Churchland argued for, or dualism, like Descartes argued for. In the remainder of the essay, Hylas and Philonous consider the existence of something called substratum. Substratum is a philosophical concept for a thing which supports properties. For our class, we don't really need to discuss substratum very much, and I'm actually going to go ahead and skip over it. Do read the last couple of pages and think about them as best you can, but we won't be considering them in detail in this lecture or in the homework. Thanks for listening. I hope this was helpful, and as always, please contact me if you have any questions. Have a good week.